They tell you that blood is thicker than water, that a mother's love is the one constant in a cruel world. But Jessica Davison learned the opposite truth before she could even understand what truth meant. Born in the glow of her father's forge in 1858, she should have grown up surrounded by warmth, the ring of hammer on steel, and the proud smile of a man who shaped metal into art. Instead, she grew up on scraps, sleeping in a cellar that smelled of coal and despair, her back a canvas of purple and red, where leather met flesh again and again. Lady Sarah didn't become a monster overnight. The transformation was slow, creeping in like rust on iron after Jessica's father, Oliver Davison, died beneath the wheels of a runaway carriage. The gambling started as a distraction from grief, or so Sarah claimed. But grief doesn't demand you wager your daughter's childhood on a hand of cards. Grief doesn't make you marry a man like Arnold Patel within 6 months, a merchant with cold eyes, and a son who learned cruelty from watching his father count coins while others starved. Jessica was 12 when she stopped being a daughter and became a servant in her own home. 13 when the whippings started. 14 when she learned that hunger could become so familiar it stopped feeling like pain and became just another part of breathing. Royal Patel, her new stepbrother, ate roasted duck while Jessica scrubbed the grease from his plate with hands that trembled from weakness. Arnold watched it all with the detached interest of a man reviewing his account books. But Sarah was the architect of this particular hell. Every lost bet, every debt that came knocking at their door, somehow became Jessica's fault. The girl's very existence seemed to enrage her mother, as if Sarah could see Oliver's gentle face in Jessica's features and needed to destroy it, piece by piece, scar by scar. What none of them knew was that a pair of steel grey eyes had begun to watch, that beyond their walls of cruelty, a man who had never spoken a word in 20 years was learning to speak through action, that Robert Humphreys, the Duke of Montvale, had seen something in the rain-soaked girl tending to horses with more kindness than she received herself, something that reminded him of a blacksmith who had once pulled him from a burning carriage and asked for nothing in return. This is the story of a girl who survived when survival seemed impossible, of a woman who found her voice in a house of silence, of justice that came not with thunder, but with the quiet determination of a man who understood that some debts can only be repaid with a lifetime of protection. Hello, everyone. Before we go deeper into today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new vidip. Share our videos to people who need it. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let us return to our main character. The forge was silent now, but Jessica could still hear it sometimes in her dreams. The rhythmic clang of her father's hammer, or the hiss of hot metal meeting water, his deep voice humming old songs as he worked. Those were the sounds of her childhood before everything turned to ash. "Girl, the chamber pots won't empty themselves." Sarah's voice cut through the memory like a blade. Jessica was on her knees, scrubbing the entrance hall floor, her 14th birthday having passed 2 days ago without acknowledgement. Her hands were raw, skin peeling from the harsh lye soap. "Yes, Mother." The word tasted like poison. "Don't call me that." Sarah's silk skirts rustled as she descended the stairs. The dress was new, emerald green with gold threading. She had won at cards last night. "You've done nothing to earn that title. Your father's death proved you're cursed, and cursed things don't deserve mothers. Jessica kept her eyes down, or she had learned that looking directly at Sarah only made things worse. Through her lowered gaze, she could see Arnold Patel's boots in the doorway of his study. He was listening, as he always did, never intervening. "The Duke of Montvale is visiting the county estates today," Sarah continued, her tone shifting to something artificially sweet. "Royal needs his best suit pressed. See that it's done properly, or you'll sleep in the stables tonight." "The stables would be warmer," Jessica muttered before she could stop herself. The slap came fast, snapping her head to the side. Her cheek bloomed hot and red. "What did you say?" "Nothing, Mother. I'll press Royal's suit." Sarah grabbed Jessica's chin, forcing her to look up. Her mother's face was beautiful still, but there was something rotting underneath, or something that showed in the tightness around her mouth, the constant calculation in her eyes. "You look just like him, you know. Your father." That same weak softness. Her fingers dug in harder. "But I'll beat it out of you if I have to. You'll learn your place." When Sarah released her and swept away, Jessica tasted blood from where she had bitten her tongue. In the study doorway, Arnold Patel had already turned away, his silence more damning than any words. The Davison home had once been modest, but warm. A blacksmith's cottage with a garden where Jessica's mother grew vegetables and herbs. Now it was something else, entirely. Arnold's money had expanded it, added wings and columns that seemed to mock the humble foundation beneath. The forge stood cold and empty, padlocked by Arnold's orders. Now Jessica carried Royal's suit to the pressing room, a cramped space off the kitchen, where steam and heat made the air thick enough to choke on. She was thin in a way that spoke of prolonged hunger, not natural build. Her dress hung loose, patched in places where the fabric had worn through. But her posture remained straight, her movements careful and precise. Her father had taught her that craftsmanship mattered, whether you were shaping steel or folding a collar. "Is that for me?" Royal appeared in the doorway, 17 and already developing the soft belly of someone who had never missed a meal. His face bore an expression of boredom mixed with casual cruelty. "Your mother asked me to press it." "My mother?" He laughed. "You mean my mother, Sarah Patel. You're just the blacksmith's brat she's stuck with." Jessica focused on the suit, laying it carefully across the pressing board. "I need to work, Royal. You need to remember your place." He stepped closer, and she could smell the wine on his breath, though it was barely noon. "Father says we're going to the Duke's estate inspection today. Real people only. You'll be here cleaning the privies where you belong." She said nothing, heating the iron, testing its temperature against a damp cloth. Silence was her shield. "Nothing to say? Good. You're learning." He reached out and yanked a strand of her dark hair, making her wince. "Though I wonder what the Duke would think if he knew the proud Sarah Patel kept her daughter in the cellar like a rat." "He would think," Jessica said quietly, "that you're cruel because you watched your father be cruel. Wasn't you never learned anything better?" The iron clattered to the floor as Royal shoved her against the wall. His hand closed around her throat, not quite choking but threatening. "Say that again." "Royal, that's enough." Arnold's voice from the doorway was calm, almost bored. "We don't damage the help before guests arrive. There's work to be done." Royal released her, smirking. "She's not worth the effort anyway." When they left, Jessica retrieved the iron with shaking hands. The burn on her palm from catching it would blister, but she couldn't afford to show pain. She had learned to swallow it down, store it somewhere deep where it couldn't reach her face, couldn't give them the satisfaction. She pressed the suit with meticulous care, knowing that any imperfection would mean the belt. Then she carried it upstairs, left it in Royal's room, and returned to her real home, the coal cellar beneath the kitchen, where a thin mattress and a single blanket waited. There, in the darkness, she let herself remember. Her father teaching her to read, using the labels on his tools, his stories of the old country, of craftsmen who could fold steel 1,000 times to create blades that sang, the way he had looked at her mother Sarah with such complete devotion that it made the world seem safe. Strength comes from the fire, he used to say, but wisdom comes from knowing when to cool the metal. Too much heat, and it becomes brittle. Too little, and it stays soft. You have to find the balance. Little spark. She had been his little spark, his apprentice, learning the basics of the trade despite Sarah's protests that it wasn't proper for a girl. What Oliver had laughed at that. Proper is just a word people use when they want to limit possibility. Now he was gone, and possibility had died with him. Jessica curled around the hollow ache in her chest and waited for sleep that wouldn't come. The carriage arrived at 10 in the morning, finer than anything Jessica had seen outside of county fair days. From her position, scrubbing the front steps, she watched Arnold and Sarah emerge in their finest clothes, Royal strutting between them like a peacock. "Remember, Jessica," Sarah had hissed earlier, while applying powder to hide the purple shadows under her eyes from another late gambling night. "You are not to be seen. If the Duke's party passes through, you disappear. Understood?" "Yes, Mother." "Don't call me that." Now Jessica kept her head down, her hands moving mechanically over stone that was already clean. She had learned the art of becoming invisible, of taking up no space, making no sound. It was survival. The Duke's inspection party would tour the county estates, reviewing properties and meeting with the merchants and landowners who paid taxes to the Montvale Duchy. It was tradition, something that happened every 5 years. Arnold had been preparing for weeks, his anxiety showing in the way he snapped at servants and counted his coin purse repeatedly. "The Duke could increase our taxes," he had told Sarah, "or worse, revoke my merchant license if he finds irregularities." Jessica wondered what irregularities he feared. She had seen the ledgers he kept locked in his study, had glimpsed numbers that didn't match the official books he showed his partners. But it wasn't her business. Nothing was her business except survival. The estate grew quiet after the carriage left. The other servants, the cook Mrs. Thornberry and the stable hand Joel Fraser, went about their work. They were kind to Jessica when Sarah wasn't watching, slipping her extra food, letting her warm herself by the kitchen fire. But they had families to feed, positions to maintain. They couldn't risk more. Jessica finished the steps and moved to the stables. The horses needed tending, and here, at least, she found something like peace. The animals didn't care that she was cursed or unwanted. They just appreciated gentle hands and kind words. "There you are, Smoke," she murmured to her father's old draft horse, the only creature left from their previous life that Arnold hadn't sold. The horse was too old for hard work now, kept only because the cost of disposal exceeded the cost of feed. "Did you sleep well?" Smoke nuzzled her palm, his breath warm. She had smuggled a carrot from the kitchen, a risk that could earn her the whip if discovered, but worth it to see the old horse's joy. "I remember when Father brought you home," she continued, brushing his mane with careful strokes. "You were so strong then. You pulled the wagon carrying all his best work to the county fair. Do you remember?" The horse's ear flicked, and Jessica chose to believe he understood. He won first prize that year, made Mother smile, really smile, before everything changed. She didn't hear the footsteps until they were very close. When she turned, her heart seized. A man stood in the stable entrance, backlit by noon sun so she couldn't see his face clearly. But his silhouette spoke of wealth and power, the cut of his coat too fine for a common visitor. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and utterly still in a way that reminded her of a hawk before it dove. Jessica dropped into a curtsy, her mind racing. The Duke! It had to be. But why was he here? The inspection was happening at the main estates across the county. He stepped forward, and she saw him properly. Late 30s, perhaps, with silver threading through dark hair. His face was stern, carved from the same stone as the castle ruins that overlooked the valley. But his eyes, grey as winter storms, held something she couldn't name. Not anger, not pity. Something else. He looked at her, then at Smoke, then at the clean stables around them. His gaze caught on her hands, still holding the brush, and she realized he could see the blisters, the burns, the too thin wrists. She waited for him to speak, to demand to know why the help was visible when she should be hidden. He didn't speak. He reached into his coat and withdrew a small leather journal and a graphite pencil. He wrote something, then turned the journal to show her. "What is the horse's name?" Jessica blinked. "Smoke, Your Grace. He belonged to my father." Another note. "You tend him well." "Thank you, Your Grace." The Duke studied her for a long moment. Right then he wrote again, and this time his hand moved faster, filling the page. "I knew a blacksmith once. Good man. Saved my life. His name was Oliver Davison." The world tilted. Jessica gripped Smoke's mane to stay upright. That was my father." The Duke's expression didn't change, but something shifted in those grey eyes. He wrote again. "I have been looking for his family, to repay a debt." Before Jessica could respond, voices echoed from the house. Sarah's laugh, high and false, Arnold's rumbling agreement. They were returning early. The Duke glanced toward the sound, then back at Jessica. He tore the page from his journal and pressed it into her hand. Then he turned and walked out of the stables with the silent grace of smoke dissipating. Jessica looked down at the paper. Beneath his earlier words, he had added one more line. "Well, you are not forgotten." She had just enough time to hide the note in her dress pocket before Sarah appeared in the stable doorway, her face flushed with wine and fury. "What are you doing here? I told you to stay out of sight." "The horses needed tending, Mother." The slap was harder this time, rocking Jessica back against Smoke's flank. "The Duke was here. He could have seen you, could have thought." Sarah's voice rose to a shriek. "You're trying to ruin everything, just like you ruined your father's life." "Sarah, enough." Arnold appeared behind her, his expression cold. "Save it for the house. We have appearances to maintain." Jessica tasted blood again, but she barely felt it. The note in her pocket seemed to burn, a secret brand against her skin. "You are not forgotten." For the first time in 2 years, hope hurt more than despair. That winter came early that year, and with it, Sarah's debts grew teeth. Jessica woke on a December morning to find the cellar door locked from outside and a single crust of bread pushed through the gap beneath it. No water. No explanation. "You'll stay there until you learn gratitude," Sarah's voice filtered down. "I clothe you, house you, and still you scheme. Joel saw you talking to someone in the stables yesterday. A man. Who was he?" Jessica's throat was too dry to answer, even if she wanted to. The Duke's visit had been a month ago, but Sarah's paranoia had been growing like mold, fed by gambling losses that Arnold could no longer hide. "Answer me." "It was no one, Mother. A traveler asking for directions." The lie came easily now. She had become a skilled liar, each falsehood a small rebellion. "Liar!" Something heavy hit the door. You think I don't know? You think I don't see you plotting, trying to steal what's left of this family's dignity? The irony would have been funny if Jessica's head didn't ache from hunger. Sarah had stolen everything, dignity included, and sold it card by card to feed her addiction. The door didn't open again for 2 days. When it finally did, Jessica had to crawl up the stairs. Her legs wouldn't support her weight. Mrs. Thornbury found her collapsed in the kitchen, her lips cracked and bleeding. "Sweet mercy," the old cook whispered, pressing a cup of water to Jessica's mouth. "What has she done to you?" "Don't!" Jessica's voice was barely sound. "Don't let her see you helping. That woman needs the Lord's judgment. The Lord seems busy elsewhere." Mrs. Thornbury helped her to a chair and brought soup, thin but warm. Jessica's stomach cramped at the first swallow, her body confused by the idea of food. "I can't watch this anymore, child. I can't stand by while she—" "You have to." Jessica caught her hand. "Please, Mrs. Thornbury. You have grandchildren depending on your wages. Don't risk them for me." The cook's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. They both knew the reality. In Sarah's house, compassion was a luxury that could cost you everything. Jessica returned to her duties that afternoon, her body moving on instinct. She cleaned Royal's room, changed the linens in the guest chambers, scrubbed the floors until her knees bled through her thin stockings. Pain was just another sensation now, as familiar as breathing. That evening, while serving dinner, she caught fragments of conversation between Arnold and Sarah. "The Duke has been asking questions," Arnold was saying, his voice tight. "About property deeds, tax assessments. He knows something." "He knows nothing," Sarah snapped. "And even if he did, what can he do? We own this house, this land." "Do we?" Arnold's fork clattered against his plate. "Because according to the county records office, there's some confusion about the deed. Something about it being held in trust under your late husband's name, with provisions for his daughter." Silence. Then Sarah's laugh, brittle as old bones. "Oliver is dead. His daughter is a servant in my house. There are no provisions that matter. The Duke seems to think otherwise. He's requested the original documents." Jessica's hands trembled as she poured wine. She kept her face blank, her movements steady, but inside her heart was racing. The Duke, to Robert Humphreys, the man who couldn't speak but whose silence carried more weight than any words. He was still looking, still searching for something. "You are not forgotten." "Then we'll give him the documents," Sarah was saying. "Forge new ones if we must. I won't lose this house to a dead man's memory and his cursed daughter." Arnold's silence was answer enough. He would help her. Of course he would. He always had. Royal, eating pheasant, while Jessica stood hungry against the wall, looked up with a smirk. "What's wrong, father? Afraid the Duke will discover what you really are? A merchant who married a title and thinks it makes him nobility? Watch your tongue, boy. Or what? You'll beat me like you let mother beat her." Royal gestured at Jessica with his knife. "At least I'm honest about what I am. You're just a coward counting coins." The argument escalated, voices rising, and in the chaos, Jessica slipped away. In the kitchen, she collapsed against the wall, her breath coming in short gasps. Mrs. Thornbury found her there, pressed a warm roll into her hands. "Eat quickly, before they remember you exist." Jessica did, tears streaming down her face. Not from sadness, from rage, from the unfairness of existing in a world where a warm roll felt like salvation, and the woman who gave birth to her wanted her erased. "There's talk in the village," Mrs. Thornbury whispered, "about the Duke. They say he's been to the county clerk 3 times, reviewing old records, looking for something, or someone." Don't, Jessica said. Don't give me hope. It's worse than the whip. But the old cook smiled, sad and knowing. Or hope is the only thing that woman can't beat out of you, child, because it doesn't live in your body. It lives somewhere she can't reach. That night, locked in the cellar again for the crime of existing, Jessica pulled out the Duke's note. She had read it so many times the paper was soft as cloth, the words fading. You are not forgotten. She traced the letters with her finger and let herself believe, just for a moment, that somewhere beyond these walls, someone remembered her father. Someone remembered that she was more than a ghost, more than a target for her mother's rage. Someone was fighting for her, even if she didn't know how or why. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Hello, everyone. Before we continue with Jessica's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let us return to our main character. January brought ice and a visitor. Jessica was in the courtyard, scrubbing frozen laundry when the Duke's carriage arrived, black and elegant against the white snow. She froze, her hands red and cracked from the cold water, her breath forming clouds in the air. Sarah appeared on the front steps immediately, her smile painted on, her dress elaborate. Arnold followed, his expression calculating. They were expecting him. This wasn't a surprise visit. Your Grace, what an honor, Sarah gushed, curtsying low. Please come inside where it's warm. The Duke descended from his carriage with that same controlled grace Jessica remembered. Today he wore a coat trimmed with fur, his boots polished to a mirror shine. He acknowledged Sarah with a slight nod, but his eyes swept the courtyard, catching on Jessica's frozen form hunched over the washing basin. Their gazes locked for a heartbeat. Jessica saw something flash in those grey eyes. Recognition, and beneath it, a cold fury that had nothing to do with the winter air. Then Sarah was guiding him inside, her voice high and nervous, and Jessica was alone again, with her frozen laundry and the question of why he had looked at her like that. From inside the house, she could hear the murmur of voices. She worked close to a window, not quite eavesdropping, but not quite avoiding it either. Reviewing all county property deeds, the Duke's representative was saying. He must have come with the Duke, a lawyer or secretary who could speak on his behalf. His Grace has concerns about several estates where the documentation seems irregular. Irregular? Arnold's voice, sharp with defensiveness. I assure you, every document is in order. Perhaps you could produce the original deed to this property, the one filed under Oliver Davison's name. Silence. Then Sarah's laugh, too loud. That old thing. My late husband left everything to me, of course. When we married, all his property became mine. It's common law. Actually, the representative continued smoothly, common law provides certain protections for children of the deceased, particularly daughters. If the original deed specified inheritance rights, it specified nothing, Arnold interrupted. And even if it did, any debts or obligations would have been settled long ago. May I see the document? More silence. Jessica risked a glance through the window. Sarah's face had gone pale beneath her powder. It's in storage. These old papers, you understand. We'd need time to locate it. The Duke stood, and even without speaking, his presence seemed to fill the room. He withdrew his journal, wrote something, and handed it to his representative. The man read it, his eyebrows rising slightly. His Grace requests that you have the documents available by week's end. He will return to collect them personally. Until then, He also requests permission to inspect the property, including all quarters where staff are housed. Staff quarters? Sarah's voice cracked. But that's highly unusual. His Grace insists. It's within his rights as Duke to ensure the welfare of all residents within his duchy. Jessica's heart hammered. He was going to see the cellar. He was going to see where she slept, how she lived. Shame flooded through her, hot despite the cold. She didn't want him to see, didn't want anyone to witness the proof of her worthlessness, the physical evidence that her own mother found her unfit for even basic dignity. But the Duke was already moving. His representative followed as Arnold gave a stiff tour, Sarah trailing behind with increasingly desperate chatter. They saw the servants' rooms first, small but clean, with proper beds and heating stoves. Mrs. Thornberry's quarters, tidy and warm. Joel Fraser's space above the stables, modest but adequate. Then Arnold tried to redirect them back to the main house. "And where does the young woman in the courtyard sleep?" the representative asked. "The courtyard?" Sarah laughed. "Oh, you mean Jessica. She prefers the cellar, actually. Servants' quarters make her anxious. Childhood trauma from her father's death. You understand? We've tried to... Show me." The Duke's representative spoke it, but the words clearly came from the Duke himself, his grey eyes fixed on Arnold with an intensity that made the merchant squirm. They descended the narrow stairs. Jessica heard them coming, heard Sarah's continued excuses, and felt her chest constrict with humiliation. The cellar door opened. The Duke stood at the threshold, his tall frame blocking the light. He looked at the thin mattress, the single blanket moth-eaten and inadequate, the bucket that served as her privy, the complete absence of heat or light or any sign that a human being lived here. He turned to Sarah. The look on his face made her step back. He wrote in his journal, each stroke of his pencil deliberate and sharp. When he finished, he handed the page to his representative. The man read it aloud, his voice carefully neutral. "His Grace wishes to know if you are aware that housing servants in conditions unfit for animals is a violation of the duchy's labor statutes, punishable by fine and potential revocation of property rights." "She's not a servant," Sarah said quickly. "She's my daughter. I have every right to..." The Duke wrote again, faster this time. "His Grace notes that if she is your daughter, then treating her worse than livestock constitutes grounds for intervention by the duchy court. If she is a servant, then you are in violation of labor laws. Which is it?" Sarah's mouth opened and closed. Arnold stepped forward, his voice placating. "Your Grace, surely there's been a misunderstanding. We'll move Jessica to proper quarters immediately. The cellar was temporary, just while we..." The Duke held up his hand. Silence fell, absolute and immediate. He looked at his representative and wrote one more note. "His Grace requires the original property deed by week's end. He also requires that the young woman, Jessica, be housed in proper quarters, with adequate heat, food and clothing until his return. If these conditions are not met, he will take further action. Do you understand?" Arnold nodded stiffly. Sarah looked like she might be sick. The Duke turned, his coat swirling, and stopped directly in front of Jessica, who had been brought in from the courtyard. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, the set of his jaw. He was furious, but his fury was ice, not fire. He met her gaze and mouthed two words. She understood them even without sound. "Be strong." Then he was gone, his carriage pulling away, leaving Jessica standing in a house that suddenly felt more dangerous than it ever had before. Because Sarah wasn't just angry now. She was terrified, and a terrified Sarah was the most dangerous thing Jessica had ever known. They moved her to a servant's room that night, but it felt more like a cell than liberation. Sarah's eyes followed her with venomous calculation, and Royal's smirk had taken on an edge that made Jessica's skin crawl. "You've been talking to him," Sarah hissed, cornering Jessica in the hallway. "The Duke. What did you tell him?" "Nothing, Mother. I swear I've said nothing." "Liar!" Sarah's hand shot out, gripping Jessica's jaw hard enough to bruise. "He knows about the deed. He knows things he shouldn't. You told him." "I don't know anything about the deed." "But you want to, don't you? You want to steal what's mine, what I built after your cursed father died, and left me with nothing but debts and a useless daughter." Jessica tried to pull away, but Sarah's grip tightened, her manicured nails drawing blood. "I should have drowned you when you were born," Sarah whispered, her breath sour with wine. "Would have saved us all this trouble." She released Jessica with a shove that sent her stumbling into the wall. Then she turned and walked away, her silk skirts rustling, leaving Jessica to wonder if tonight would be the night her mother's hatred finally went too far. The week passed in tense silence. Sarah and Arnold spent hours locked in the study with lawyers, their voices rising and falling in heated debate. Royal watched Jessica with increasing hostility, once pushing her down the stairs hard enough that she sprained her wrist. "Accident," he said, smiling. "You're so clumsy." Mrs. Thornbury tended to the wrist in secret, wrapping it with strips of clean cloth and muttering prayers under her breath. "That Duke? He's seen something," the old cook said, "and he's not the kind to let go once he's got his teeth in. I've heard stories about him. Lost his voice in the same accident that killed his parents, but he's sharper than any man with a tongue. And once he decides something is unjust..." She shook her head. "Well, injustice doesn't last long in Montvale." Jessica wanted to believe her, but belief required hope, and hope required strength she wasn't sure she had left. On the 7th day, the Duke returned. This time he brought more than his representative. He brought county officials, a magistrate, and most importantly, he brought documents. Jessica watched from a window as they filed into the house, their expressions grave. Sarah's face had gone white as parchment. The meeting lasted 3 hours. Jessica wasn't allowed in the room, but she stood outside the door, listening to fragments that made her heart race. Mole's original deed clearly states, "Inheritance rights cannot be waived without consent of the heir." Fraud in the modification of legal documents. Sarah's voice, shrill and desperate. "She's just a girl. She has no legal standing. She is the sole legitimate heir to Oliver Davison's estate." The magistrate's voice, calm and implacable, which includes this property, the forge, and all associated assets. The modifications you made to the deed after your husband's death are void. "That's impossible. I married Arnold in good faith. We invested our own money. Money which was garnered through the sale of property that legally belonged to Miss Davison, which constitutes theft." The sound of something shattering. Arnold's voice, low and furious. "This is persecution. The Duke has no right. The Duke has every right to enforce the law within his duchy, and the law is clear." Jessica's legs gave out. She slid down the wall, her mind unable to process what she was hearing. The house was hers, had always been hers. Everything Sarah had done, every justification for the beatings and the starvation and the cruelty, was built on a lie. The door opened. The Duke stood there, looking down at her with those grey eyes. Behind him, Sarah was weeping. Arnold was shouting, and officials were gathering documents. The Duke extended his hand. Jessica stared at it. His hand was large, scarred across the knuckles, steady as stone. A hand that had never hurt her, never demanded anything from her, never struck her or starved her or treated her as less than human. She took it. He pulled her gently to her feet, and for the first time in years, Jessica felt like she was standing on solid ground. The representative appeared beside them. "Miss Davison, the magistrate would like to speak with you about your living conditions and what you wish to do with your property." Jessica's voice was hoarse. "I don't understand what's happening." "Your father," the representative explained, "left his entire estate to you in trust until you came of age. Your mother's remarriage didn't change that. She has been living on your property, using your resources, and claiming ownership that was never legally hers. But she always said. She lied," the Duke's representative said simply. "And now the truth has consequences." Sarah appeared in the doorway, mascara running down her face. For a moment, she looked almost human, almost like the mother Jessica vaguely remembered from before the gambling, before the cruelty. "Jessica, please. You have to understand. I did what I thought was best. After your father died, the debts, the pressure, I couldn't manage alone." "So you beat me instead?" Jessica's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried. "You starved me, locked me in a cellar, told me I was cursed. That was what you thought was best? I was trying to make you strong." "No." Jessica straightened, feeling the Duke's solid presence beside her like an anchor. "You were trying to break me so you could forget you ever loved Father. So you could forget that he was good and kind, and you weren't." Sarah's face twisted. The moment of humanity vanished, replaced by the rage Jessica knew so well. "You ungrateful little wretch. After everything I've done for you, feeding you, clothing you." "Enough." The magistrate stepped forward. "Lady Patel, you are hereby notified that you have 30 days to vacate this property. Any attempt to remove or sell assets will be considered theft and prosecuted accordingly." "Vacate? This is my home." "This is Miss Davison's home. You are a guest who has overstayed her welcome." Arnold pushed past Sarah, his expression calculating even in defeat. "And what of my investments, the renovations, the improvements?" "You are welcome to submit receipts for review. Any legitimate improvements to the property may be compensated at fair value, minus the cost of Miss Davison's care and upkeep during the time she was misappropriated." Jessica almost laughed. Misappropriated, as if she were a piece of furniture that had been used incorrectly. The Duke touched her shoulder, gentle but grounding. When she looked up at him, he mouthed one word. "Come." She understood without explanation. He was offering sanctuary, a place to go while the legal matters were settled, while Sarah and Arnold packed their lies and left. "I'll go with him," Jessica said to the magistrate. "Are you certain, Miss Davison? You could stay here with a guardian appointed by the court." "I'm certain. Because staying in this house, even for one more night, even with Sarah's power broken, would destroy something in her that had managed to survive everything else." Mrs. Thornbury appeared with a small bag. "What, I packed your father's things, child. The ones I've been hiding all these years. And a few of yours." Jessica took the bag, tears finally coming. "Thank you for everything." "You thank the Duke," the old cook said, glancing at Robert with something like awe. "He's been working on this for months, searching records, questioning officials, building a case. He knew your father, you see, knew what kind of man he was. And he knew that man wouldn't leave his daughter to wolves." The Duke's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes softened. He offered Jessica his arm, formal and courtly, as if she were already the lady of the estate, and not a girl in rags with bruises layered on bruises. She took it, and together they walked out of the house where she had suffered, past Sarah's wails and Arnold's curses, or past Royal's shocked silence. The Duke's carriage waited, black and beautiful, lined with velvet the colour of deep burgundy. He helped her inside, his touch careful, as if she might break. As the carriage pulled away, Jessica looked back one last time. The house stood against the winter sky, beautiful and poisonous. Sarah's face appeared in a window, twisted with rage. Jessica didn't wave. She turned forward, toward whatever came next, and let herself breathe. The Duke sat across from her, writing in his journal. When he finished, he showed her the page. "You're safe now, I promise." Jessica believed him, because Robert Humphreys, the Duke of Montvale, was a man who had spent months building a case to save a blacksmith's daughter. A man who couldn't speak but whose silence was louder than any oath. Not a man who understood that some debts could only be repaid with a lifetime of protection. And for the first time since her father died, Jessica Davison felt like she might actually survive. We are halfway through Jessica's journey from the ashes to the throne. Many of you are watching right now, feeling the weight of her struggle, yet you haven't subscribed. It takes only a second to support the storytelling that brings these lessons of justice to life. If you believe that no one should suffer in silence like Jessica, show your support now. Don't leave her story unfinished. Montvale Estate rose from the landscape like something from a fairy tale, all grey stone and sweeping windows, surrounded by gardens that even in winter held a stark beauty. Jessica pressed her face to the carriage window, her breath fogging the glass. "It's beautiful," she whispered. The Duke smiled, just a slight curve of his mouth, but it transformed his stern face into something almost gentle. The carriage stopped before massive oak doors, and servants appeared immediately. They moved with efficiency, but Jessica noticed something unusual. They watched the Duke's hands, not his face. He communicated through gesture, quick movements that they seemed to understand perfectly. A woman in her 50s approached, her expression warm. She curtsied to the Duke, then turned to Jessica with kind eyes. "Miss Davison, I'm Mrs. Thornberry, the head housekeeper here. His Grace has instructed me to ensure you have everything you need. Please come inside. You must be frozen." Mrs. Thornberry. Jessica blinked. "But I knew a Mrs. Thornberry at my sister, dear. She wrote to me about you months ago. When His Grace started making inquiries, I knew it was only a matter of time." She took Jessica's arm gently. "Come now, let's get you warm." The inside of the estate was overwhelming. Marble floors, paintings that must have cost fortunes, chandeliers that sparkled with what looked like real crystal. Jessica felt suddenly, painfully aware of her patched dress, her cracked boots, the bruises still visible on her wrists. Mrs. Thornberry noticed her hesitation. "You're not a guest here, Miss Davison. His Grace wants you to know this is your home for as long as you need it. Perhaps longer, if things work out, as I suspect they will." The older woman's smile held secrets Jessica didn't understand yet. They climbed a grand staircase, turned down a hallway lined with portraits of stern-faced nobles, and stopped at a door carved with roses. "Your room," Mrs. Thornberry said, opening it. Jessica stepped inside and stopped breathing. The room was bigger than the entire cottage she had shared with her father. A four-poster bed dominated one wall, draped in fabric the color of morning sky. A fireplace crackled with warmth. Windows overlooked the gardens, and in the corner a copper bathtub steamed with hot water, already prepared. "I thought you might want to wash first," Mrs. Thornberry said. "Then there's a meal waiting. His Grace insists you eat before you rest. Doctor's orders. You're far too thin, and we need to build your strength slowly." Jessica touched the bed, half expecting it to disappear. The fabric was soft, softer than anything she had ever felt. "I don't understand," she said quietly. "Why is he doing this?" Mrs. Thornbury's expression turned serious. 20 years ago, His Grace was in a carriage accident. The horses bolted, the driver was killed, and the carriage went into a ravine. He was trapped inside with his parents, who died on impact. The fire started almost immediately. Jessica's hand flew to her mouth. A blacksmith pulled him out, burned his own hands badly doing it, but he saved the Duke's life. By the time help arrived, the blacksmith was gone. Never left his name, never asked for reward. His Grace has been searching for that man for 2 decades. "My father," Jessica whispered. "Your father," Mrs. Thornbury confirmed. "He found you 3 months ago by accident, making a county inspection. Saw you in those stables, saw how you were treated, and started digging into your family's history. When he realized who you were," she smiled. "Well, let's just say His Grace takes his debts very seriously." Jessica sank onto the bed, overwhelmed. "My father saved him? And now His Grace is saving you. Call it fate, call it justice, call it whatever you like. The important thing is you're here now, and you're safe." The bath was heaven. Mrs. Thornbury helped her wash, gentle with the bruises, careful with the half-healed welts on her back. The water turned grey with dirt, and Jessica felt layers of pain and fear wash away with it. Clean clothes waited, a simple dress in soft wool, undergarments that actually fit, stockings without holes. Jessica touched each item with wonder, still half convinced it would vanish. The meal came next, brought by a servant to her room. Mrs. Thornbury supervised as Jessica ate small portions of broth, bread, and mild cheese. "Your stomach has shrunk," the housekeeper explained. "We'll increase your portions gradually. Try to eat slowly." Jessica obeyed, though every instinct screamed at her to devour everything in sight. The food tasted impossibly good. The bread was fresh, the broth rich with herbs, the cheese smooth and creamy. Halfway through the meal, the Duke appeared in the doorway. He knocked first, waiting for permission before entering, a courtesy no one had shown Jessica in years. "Come in, Your Grace," Jessica said, wiping her mouth self-consciously. He entered, carrying a wooden box under his arm. He set it on the table beside her meal and opened it. Inside were tools. Blacksmith's tools, old and well used, the handles worn smooth from decades of work. "Fathers," Jessica breathed, recognizing them immediately. How did you—" The Duke pulled out his journal. "I went to the old forge. These were still there, locked away. I thought you might want them." Tears came, sudden and overwhelming. Jessica touched the hammer, the tongs, the small anvil her father had let her practice on. They smelled of metal and oil and memory. "He was teaching me," she said through the tears, "before he died. He said I had good hands for the work, that gender didn't matter if you had the skill." The Duke smiled and wrote again. "He was right. I saw how you cared for the horse, how you maintained the stables. You have his precision, his attention to detail. I miss him so much." "I know." The Duke sat across from her, his presence solid and reassuring. He didn't try to stop her crying, didn't tell her to be strong or to move on. He just sat, silent as always, and let her grieve properly for the first time since her father's death. When the tears finally slowed, Jessica found her voice again. "Why did he never tell anyone? That he saved you?" The Duke considered this, then wrote carefully. "Because he was a good man who did good things without expecting reward. The world has too few of those. And you're trying to repay him by saving me. No. The Duke underlined the word twice. I'm saving you because it's the right thing to do. Because no one deserves what you endured. Your father's sacrifice made it personal, but the injustice made it necessary. Jessica looked at this quiet, powerful man who had upended her entire world in the span of a week. What happens now? Now you heal. You rest. You learn that the world can be kind as well as cruel. And when you're ready, we decide together what comes next. Together? The Duke's expression turned almost shy. He wrote quickly, then showed her the page with what looked like reluctance. I have a proposition, but it can wait until you're stronger. For now, just know that you have a home here for as long as you want it. Jessica wanted to ask more, but exhaustion was pulling at her like a tide. The warm food, the soft bed, but the safety, it was all too much for her traumatized system to process. Mrs. Thornbury noticed immediately. Come now, you need rest. His Grace, she's falling asleep on her feet. The Duke stood, bowed slightly to Jessica, another courtesy that made her throat tight, and left. Mrs. Thornbury helped Jessica into bed, tucking the covers around her like she was a small child. Sleep, dear. You're safe here. The Duke's guards patrol the grounds, and no one gets past them. You can rest. Jessica wanted to argue, wanted to stay awake, and make sure this wasn't a dream. But the moment her head touched the pillow, sleep claimed her. For the first time in years, she slept without nightmares, without fear, without the expectation of being woken by a blow or a shout. She slept like the child she had never been allowed to be safe in the knowledge that someone was watching over her. Someone who asked for nothing in return except the chance to right an old wrong and create something new from the ashes of the past. Jessica woke to sunlight, real sunlight streaming through windows that weren't barred or covered. For a moment, panic seized her. She had overslept. Sarah would be furious. The punishment would be severe. Then memory returned. The Duke, Montvale, safety. She sat up, her body aching in new ways. Not the ache of injury or hunger, but the ache of muscles finally allowed to relax, of tension finally released. A knock at the door made her tense again, old habits dying hard. Miss Davison, it's Mrs. Thornbury. May I come in? Yes, please. The housekeeper entered with a tray of breakfast. Eggs, toast, fruit, tea. Real food, enough to make Jessica's eyes water. His Grace thought you might like to eat in your room this morning. He knows everything must be overwhelming. It is, Jessica admitted. I keep thinking I'll wake up back in the cellar. You won't. The Duke has already assigned guards to watch your mother's house. If she tries to come for you, she'll be arrested. You're protected now. Jessica ate slowly, savoring each bite. The eggs were perfect, the toast crisp, the fruit sweet and fresh. It felt almost wrong to enjoy it so much when she knew Mrs. Thornbury's sister, the cook at the Patel house, had lived through all that horror with her. After breakfast, Mrs. Thornbury helped her dress. The clothes were simple but well made, a dress in deep blue that actually fit. When Jessica looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. Not you're going to be beautiful once you've had proper care, Mrs. Thornbury said. You have your father's eyes. The morning passed in a blur. Jessica explored her room, finding books on the shelves. Real books, not the tattered ones Sarah had grudgingly allowed. She found paper and pencils, a music box that played a haunting melody when opened. Around midday, the Duke came to call. He knocked again, that same courtesy that made her chest tight. Come in, Your Grace. He entered, today dressed more casually in just a vest and shirt sleeves. He looked younger like this, less intimidating. He carried his journal, as always, and gestured toward the window. "Would you like to see the estate? The fresh air might do you good." Jessica hesitated. "I don't want to impose on your time." He smiled and wrote quickly. "You're not an imposition. You're the daughter of the man who gave me my life. If anything, I'm the one imposing on you." They walked the gardens together, the Duke adjusting his long stride to match her shorter one. He pointed out features: the rose garden that would bloom in spring, the hedge maze, the fountain that allegedly dated back 3 centuries. But he didn't just show her things. He watched her, noting what caught her interest. When she stopped to admire the forge building on the edge of the estate, he wrote a note. "Do you want to see inside?" "Yes, please." The forge was smaller than her father's had been, but better equipped. Tools hung in careful order on the walls. A bellows sat ready. The anvil gleamed with recent polishing. "Do you use this?" Jessica asked. The Duke shook his head and wrote, "The last smith died 3 years ago. I haven't found a replacement." Jessica ran her hand over the anvil, feeling the slight indentations from thousands of hammer blows. "My father would have loved this place." "Would you?" She looked up at him, confused. The Duke took a breath, then wrote more carefully than usual. "I have a proposition. I said I would wait, but seeing you here, I think now might be the right time." Jessica's heart began to race. "Your property, the house and forge, legally belongs to you. But it will take time to clear Sarah and Arnold out, to restore everything. In the meantime, you need somewhere to live, somewhere to heal." He turned the page. "I would like to offer you a position here. Not as a servant, as an equal. You could learn the forge, help me manage the estate, have a real home. In return, well, I offer my protection and my resources to help you reclaim what's yours." "That's very generous, but..." He held up his hand and wrote more. "There's more. I'm 38 years old. I've never married. The duchy expects an heir, and my advisors have been pressuring me to find a wife. But every woman they introduce treats my silence as a flaw to be overlooked, rather than simply how I am." Jessica's breath caught. "You're 18, legally an adult. You've survived horrors that would break most people. You're intelligent, kind, and you understand that silence doesn't mean absence." He turned to a new page, his hand shaking slightly. "I'm not asking you to love me. I'm not even asking you to marry me right now. I'm asking if you would consider, in time, a partnership, a marriage of mutual respect and protection. You would have security, resources, and freedom. I would have a partner who sees me as I am, not as a damaged duke." Jessica couldn't breathe. "You want to marry me?" "Eventually, if you want to. There's no pressure, no expectation. But I wanted to be honest about my intentions from the start." She looked at this man who had saved her, who had spent months building a case to free her, who was offering her not just rescue, but a future. "I don't know how to be a duchess," she said quietly. "I don't know how to be a husband," he wrote. "We could learn together. People would talk about the age difference, about how we met. Let them talk. I stopped caring about gossip 20 years ago, when I lost my voice, and learned who my real friends were." Jessica touched the anvil again, thinking of her father. What would he say? Would he approve of this quiet, powerful man who communicated through actions rather than words? She thought she knew the answer. Her father had always said that a person's character showed in what they did, not what they promised. And Robert Humphreys had done more for her in 3 months than anyone had in years. "Can I think about it?" she asked. Not the proposition. I mean, yes, I'd like to stay here, learn the forge, help with the estate. But the marriage part? Can that wait? The Duke's relief was visible. He nodded vigorously and wrote, "Of course. Take all the time you need. Years, if necessary. I just wanted you to know my intentions." "Why?" The question burst out before she could stop it. "Why me? You're a duke. You could have anyone." He looked at her for a long moment, then wrote slowly, "Because when I saw you in those stables, or caring for that horse despite your own pain, I saw something I recognize. Strength that doesn't need to announce itself. Kindness that survives despite cruelty. And I thought, if I could share my life with someone like that, I would be lucky indeed." Jessica felt tears prick her eyes again. "I'm broken," she whispered. "What Sarah did to me. The scars." The Duke gently tilted her chin up so she had to look at him. He wrote one word. "So? Then more. Everyone is broken somehow. I lost my voice and my parents in the same night. You lost your father and gained a monster. But broken things can be mended. And sometimes the mended version is stronger than the original." Jessica smiled through her tears. "You're very wise for a man who doesn't speak." "I've had a lot of time to think," he wrote with a wry smile. "I'd not much else to do during long council meetings. They laughed together, and it felt strange and wonderful. When was the last time Jessica had laughed? Really laughed? Not the bitter, hollow sound she sometimes made in the cellar. "I'd like to try," she said. "The forge, the estate, all of it. And maybe the other thing too. But slowly. Slowly is perfect," he wrote. "We have time." And standing there in the dusty forge, Jessica believed him. For the first time in years, she believed in time, in futures, in possibilities that didn't end in pain. She believed in this silent man who spoke volumes through his actions and offered her not pity, but partnership. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was something better. It was hope. Spring came slowly to Montvale, bringing with it new growth and new revelations. Jessica had spent the winter learning. Mrs. Thornbury taught her estate management, how to review accounts, manage staff, plan menus. The Duke's secretary, a kind man named Christopher, taught her history and politics, preparing her for a role she wasn't sure she wanted, but was starting to understand might be necessary. And in the forge, Jessica taught herself. She lit the fires, heated the metal, and slowly, carefully, began to remember what her father had shown her. Her first attempts were clumsy. She burned herself, struck her thumb instead of the iron, created a horseshoe so misshapen it made her laugh. But she kept trying, and with each attempt, she heard her father's voice. "Patience, little spark. The metal will tell you when it's ready. You just have to listen." The Duke often watched her work, sitting on a bench outside the forge, or reading or writing in his journal. He never criticized, never offered unwanted advice. He just was there, a steady presence that made her feel safe enough to fail. One afternoon in March, as Jessica was cleaning her tools, she noticed something odd. The forge's main anvil had a seam along one side, barely visible beneath years of use and soot. She ran her finger along it, frowning. It felt deliberate, not a crack from wear. "Your Grace?" She turned to find the Duke watching her. "Is this anvil supposed to open?" He looked genuinely surprised. He came closer, examining the seam with interest, then wrote, "I've never noticed that before. This forge has been here for generations." Jessica found a thin piece of metal and carefully worked it into the seam. Something clicked, and a small compartment popped open. Inside was a package wrapped in oilcloth, perfectly preserved. With shaking hands, Jessica unwrapped it. Inside were papers, documents, letters, and a ring. A signet ring bearing a familiar crest. She knew that ring. Her father had worn it every day. "That's father's," she whispered. "But how?" The Duke took the documents carefully, his expression growing more intent as he read. Then he sat heavily on the bench, his face pale. He wrote quickly, his handwriting shakier than usual. "Jessica, these documents, your father wasn't just a blacksmith." "What do you mean?" "He was the Duke of Ashford's third son, a nobleman who gave up his title to pursue smithing. He was supposed to inherit the Ashford Forge estates, but he ran away 20 years ago. The family declared him dead rather than admit he chose a craft over a title." Jessica's legs gave out. She sat hard on the ground, her mind reeling. "My father was nobility?" The Duke nodded, and according to these documents, he never formally renounced his rights, which means legally. He didn't finish writing. He didn't need to. Jessica understood. If her father was the Duke of Ashford's son, and he never renounced his rights, then she wasn't just a blacksmith's daughter. She was the legitimate heir to the Ashford estates. "But that's impossible," she breathed. "He was a blacksmith. He chose that life." "He chose it," the Duke wrote. "But the law doesn't care about choices. It cares about bloodlines and legitimacy, and these documents prove both." Jessica picked up one of the letters. It was from her grandmother, the Duchess of Ashford, begging Oliver to come home, to claim his birthright. He had refused, writing back that he had found more honor in creating with his hands than in managing lands he didn't earn. Another letter, from her mother, Sarah, before they were married. She sounded different in these pages. Younger, hopeful, in love with a man who chose her over wealth and title. What had broken her? When had that hopeful girl become the monster who starved her daughter? "What do we do?" Jessica asked. The Duke thought for a long moment, then wrote carefully. "We have options. You could claim the Ashford estates. They're vast, wealthy, powerful. Or you could continue as you are, learning, growing, deciding your own path." "What would you do?" "I would do what I've always done," he wrote. "Make my decisions based on what's right, not what's expected." Jessica looked at the ring, her father's ring. It was heavy, inscribed with words in Latin she couldn't read. "Christopher can translate," the Duke wrote, seeing her confusion. "But I can tell you what it means. Duty to craft, honor to family." Her father's entire philosophy in 6 words. He had tried to balance both, and in the end he had chosen the craft he loved and the family he made. He had given up everything else. "I want to think about this," Jessica said. "Can we keep this quiet for now?" The Duke nodded and wrote, "Of course. This is your choice, your legacy. No one will know until you're ready." They sat together in the forge, surrounded by her father's hidden past and her uncertain future, and Jessica felt the weight of heritage settling on her shoulders. She had gone from a starved servant to a duke's ward to a potential duchess in her own right. It was too much to process. But one thing was clear. Her father had taught her that value came from what you created, not what you inherited. If she claimed the Ashford estates, it would be because she had something to offer them, not because blood gave her the right. And that was going to take time. Time to heal, to learn, to become someone worthy of the legacy her father had left behind. The Duke seemed to understand without her saying anything. He stood, offered his hand to help her up, and together they walked back to the main house. Behind them, the forge stood quiet, holding its secrets close. But the ring stayed with Jessica, heavy in her pocket, a reminder that sometimes the past reached out to reshape the future in ways no one could predict. And sometimes, just sometimes, the broken girl became the heir, the servant became the lady, and the silent man became the bridge between who she was and who she could be. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in April, delivered by a nervous courier who looked like he expected to be arrested. Mrs. Thornbury brought it to Jessica during breakfast, with an expression that made her stomach tighten. "It's from your mother," the housekeeper said quietly. Jessica stared at the envelope. Sarah's handwriting, elegant and familiar, spelling out her name with the same careful loops that had once labelled jars of preserves and birthday cards. The Duke, sitting across from her, noticed her hesitation. He wrote quickly, "You don't have to read it." "I think I do," Jessica said. "Whatever she has to say. I should know." She opened it. The letter was 2 pages, written in Sarah's best hand. "My dearest Jessica, I hope this letter finds you well. I know our parting was difficult, but I want you to know that I've spent these months reflecting on my actions." Jessica's hand trembled. She continued reading. "I realize now that I was too harsh. Grief drove me to irrational behavior after your father's death. I pushed you too hard, expected too much. But everything I did was because I wanted you to be strong, to survive in a world that's cruel to women without resources. Arnold and I have fallen on hard times. The house you so generously claim is all we have left. If we must leave, we'll be destitute. Royal will have no future. I write not to beg, but to offer a compromise. If you would return home, we could be a family again. You could manage the estate. I see now that was your birthright all along. Arnold and Royal would defer to your authority. We would live peacefully together. Alternatively, if you choose to stay with the Duke, perhaps a small allowance could be arranged. Enough to rent a modest house to maintain basic dignity. And I know I don't deserve your kindness after everything, but I'm still your mother. All my love, Sarah Jessica read it twice, then handed it to the Duke. He scanned it quickly, his expression darkening with each line. When he finished, he wrote one word: manipulative. "She's offering to let me be in charge if I come back," Jessica said. "Doesn't that show change?" "No," the Duke wrote emphatically. "It shows desperation. She would say anything to maintain access to your property." "But what if she means it?" The Duke put down his pencil and looked at her seriously. Then he stood, left the room, and returned a moment later with a stack of documents. He set them in front of Jessica and wrote, "I've been monitoring your mother's activities through my contacts. These are reports from the last 3 months." Jessica opened the first document. It was a record from a gambling house in the next county. Sarah had been there repeatedly, betting amounts she couldn't possibly afford, losing more often than winning. The next document showed debts, massive debts to dangerous people. "She hasn't changed at all," Jessica whispered. "No. And if you gave her money or returned to that house, she would drain everything and start the abuse again. This letter is just another form of manipulation." Jessica felt tears burn her eyes, but not from sadness, from rage. Even now, even after everything, Sarah was still trying to use her. "What should I do?" the Duke wrote carefully. "That depends on who you want to be. You could give her money, knowing she'll waste it. You could let her stay in the house, knowing she'll destroy it. Or you could hold firm and let her face the consequences of her choices. Well, she's my mother." "She was your tormentor," the Duke wrote, the words sharp and clear. "Being related to someone doesn't give them the right to abuse you, and helping her now would only enable her to continue the same patterns." Jessica knew he was right, but knowing didn't make it easier. "Will you help me write a response?" she asked quietly. The Duke nodded and pulled out fresh paper. Together they crafted a letter. It took 3 drafts before Jessica was satisfied. Mother, I received your letter and your request. After careful consideration, I must decline. You say you want me to return home, but that house has never been my home. It was a place where I was starved, beaten, and told I was worthless. I survived it, but I will not return to it. As for an allowance, I cannot in good conscience provide funds that I know will be used for gambling and waste. You have had 3 months to change your habits. Instead, you've accrued new debts at gaming houses across the county. The house will be sold. Proceeds will cover legitimate expenses you and Arnold incurred in its maintenance, verified by accountants. The remainder will establish the Davison Foundation, which will provide education and apprenticeships to children who've lost parents, ensuring they don't end up as I did. You have until the end of the month to vacate. After that, the magistrate will enforce the eviction. I don't wish you ill, Mother, but I won't enable your destruction anymore. Jessica Davison. When it was finished, Jessica felt both relieved and terrified. The Duke put his hand over hers. You did the right thing, he wrote. Hard doesn't mean wrong. What if she shows up here? She won't get past the gates, he assured her. And if she tries, she'll be arrested for trespassing. You're protected. Jessica sealed the letter with wax and handed it to Mrs. Thornberry to send. Then she sat back, feeling strangely empty. I thought I'd feel better, she admitted. Setting boundaries, standing up to her. But I just feel sad. The Duke wrote gently. That's because you're grieving. Not for the mother Sarah was, but for the mother she should have been. That grief is valid. Will it always hurt this much? No, it will fade. And one day you'll realize you've gone a whole day without thinking of her. Then a week. Then longer. The pain doesn't disappear, but it stops defining you. Jessica looked at this man who had lost his parents, so young, who had survived trauma of his own, and realized he understood in a way few people could. Thank you, she said, for everything, for saving me, for being patient, for seeing me as more than a damaged girl. The Duke smiled and wrote one more note. I don't see you as damaged. I see you as strong enough to survive things that would break most people. There's a difference. That evening they walked the gardens as the sun set. Spring flowers were beginning to bloom, crocuses pushing through the last of the snow, early daffodils turning their faces to the light. It's beautiful, Jessica said, but I never noticed how beautiful the world could be. When you're just surviving, you don't see it. The Duke nodded and wrote. Now you're not just surviving. You're living. And there's so much to see. Jessica stopped walking, turning to face him. In the golden light of sunset, he looked less severe, the lines around his eyes softening. Your proposition, she said, the one about partnership. His expression grew careful, hopeful. I think I'd like to say yes. Not immediately, she added quickly. But maybe, eventually, when I'm ready. The Duke's smile was radiant. He wrote quickly. Eventually is perfect. We have time. What if I'm never ready? What if the scars are too deep? Then we remain friends and partners without the marriage. I meant what I said, Jessica. I want you in my life however you're comfortable being here. She took his hand, feeling the calluses from the reins of horses he rode, the slight roughness of a man who worked with his hands despite his title. I want to try, she said, to be someone worthy of you, of this estate, of my father's legacy. You already are, he wrote. You just need to believe it. As they walked back to the house, hand in hand, Jessica felt something shift inside her. The constant fear that had lived in her chest since her father's death began to loosen its grip. She was safe. She was valued. She was building a life that was hers by choice, not by circumstance. And maybe, just maybe, she was beginning to believe that she deserved it. The Grand Winter Gala was an annual tradition at Montvale Estate, a gathering of the duchy's nobility and important merchants. This year, it carried special significance. It would be Jessica's debut, not as a servant or a ward, but as the Duke's chosen partner. The news had spread through the county like wildfire. Robert Humphreys, the silent Duke who had refused every marriage proposal for 20 years, had finally chosen a bride. And not just any bride, but a blacksmith's daughter, who came with no dowry, no connections, just a claim to a minor noble title that most people didn't even know about. The gossip was vicious. Some called it scandalous. Others called it romantic. A few called it exactly what Robert Humphreys would do, choosing character over convention. Jessica stood in her room, staring at the gown Mrs. Thornbury had helped her select. It was silver grey, the colour of storm clouds and steel, with subtle embroidery that formed patterns of hammered metal. A dress that honoured both her past and her future. "You look like a queen," Mrs. Thornbury said, adjusting the final pins. "I feel like an imposter." "That's normal. But remember, half the people down there are imposters too. They just hide it better." Jessica smiled despite her nerves. Over the past months, she had learned that nobility was often just acting, performing a role of confidence and authority until it became real. The Duke had been teaching her, not through words but through example. The way he carried himself, the way he made decisions, the way he commanded respect without ever speaking. A knock at the door made her jump. "His Grace is here," Mrs. Thornbury said with a knowing smile. Robert entered, resplendent in formal attire, his silver-threaded hair carefully styled. He stopped when he saw Jessica, his grey eyes widening. He pulled out his journal, wrote something, and showed her. "You're stunning." Jessica blushed. "It's the dress." "It's you," he wrote firmly. "The dress just makes it obvious." He offered his arm, formal and courtly. Jessica took it, her hand trembling slightly. "What if they hate me?" she whispered as they walked toward the ballroom. "Some will," he wrote honestly. "Others will love you. Most won't care either way. What matters is what you think of yourself." "I think I'm terrified." "Good. Fear means you care. Caring means you'll do your best." The ballroom doors opened, and a hush fell over the crowd. The room was massive, lit by thousands of candles in crystal chandeliers. Men in tailcoats and women in elaborate gowns turned to stare as Jessica and the Duke entered. The majordomo announced them. "His Grace, my Robert Humphreys, Duke of Montvale, and Miss Jessica Davison. Not the blacksmith's daughter, not the ward, just her name, spoken with the same respect as any noble title." They descended the stairs together, and Jessica felt every eye in the room tracking their movement. She recognized some faces, merchants who had visited the Patel house, nobles who had seen her scrubbing floors and never bothered to look twice, and in the far corner, half hidden by a pillar, she saw them. Sarah, Arnold, and Royal. They had come, presumably hoping to make a scene or to plead their case in public. Sarah wore a dress that was too elaborate, too desperate, jewelry that sparkled, but was probably paste. Her face was powdered heavily, but Jessica could see the lines of stress, the telltale signs of someone who had been losing at cards more than winning. Their eyes met across the ballroom. Sarah's expression was complex. Hate, desperation, something that might have been regret if Jessica hadn't known better. The Duke felt Jessica tense. He wrote quickly on a small card he kept in his pocket. "Ignore them. They're nothing." But Jessica shook her head. "No, I need to do this." She approached her mother, the Duke, a solid presence at her side. The crowd parted, sensing drama. "Mother," Jessica said, her voice steady. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Jessica." Sarah's voice was honey over poison. "You look lovely." "Doesn't she, Arnold?" Arnold grunted, his eyes calculating. "Very fine. The Duke has excellent taste." "We hoped," Sarah continued, "that we might speak privately. About the house, about arrangements." "There's nothing to discuss," Jessica said. "I sent my response, that it was final. But surely, for your family—" "You are not my family." Jessica's voice rang clear. "You stopped being my family the first time you raised your hand to me, the first time you locked me in that cellar, the first time you chose gambling over your daughter's survival." Gasps rippled through the watching crowd. Sarah's face went white, then red. "How dare you?" she hissed. "After everything I sacrificed—" "You sacrificed nothing," Jessica interrupted. "You sold everything. Father's tools, his reputation, my childhood, all to feed an addiction you refuse to acknowledge." The Duke stepped forward, and though he said nothing, his presence was a wall of protection. He pulled out his journal and wrote a note, which his secretary, present for exactly this purpose, read aloud. "His Grace wishes to inform you, Lady Patel, that the sale of the Davison property is final. The eviction stands. Additionally, if you continue to harass Miss Davison, charges will be brought for trespass and intimidation. You have been warned." Sarah's carefully maintained composure cracked. "You ungrateful little wretch, I raised you." "You tortured me," Jessica said, quietly, "and the fact that you can't see the difference says everything about who you are." She turned away, the Duke's hand steady at her back. Behind them, Sarah's voice rose in protest, but it was Arnold who pulled her away, muttering about making a scene. Royal stayed frozen, his face pale. For a moment, he looked almost human, almost sorry. Jessica didn't care. She had said what she needed to say, and now she was done. The Duke guided her to the center of the ballroom. Music began, a waltz, and he offered his hand for the first dance. Jessica had learned to dance over the winter months, though she was still clumsy. But the Duke led with patient confidence, and she followed, feeling the eyes of the nobility watching their every move. "They're all staring," she whispered. He smiled and touched his chest, then pointed to her, then gestured around the room. The message was clear. Let them stare. We're here together. As they danced, others joined them on the floor. Not everyone. Some of the older nobles kept their distance, disapproving of the match, but enough people accepted them that Jessica felt the knot of anxiety in her chest begin to loosen. Halfway through the evening, a new arrival caused a stir. A couple Jessica didn't recognize, older and distinguished. The Duke's secretary appeared at her elbow. "Miss Davison, may I present the Duke and Duchess of Ashford? They've requested an audience." Jessica's blood went cold. The Duke, her grandfather. The Duchess, her grandmother. Her father's parents, who had declared him dead rather than accept his choice. Robert Humphreys tensed beside her, ready to intervene if she wished. But Jessica squared her shoulders. "Show them in." The Duke and Duchess of Ashford approached. They were elderly, elegant, and looked hauntingly like her father around the eyes. "Miss Davison," the Duke said, his voice formal, but with an undercurrent of emotion. "We owe you an apology. Several, in fact." Jessica waited, silent. "We learned recently," the Duchess continued, "of your father's death, and of your circumstances. Had we known, had we ever bothered to look beyond our pride and anger, now we would have intervened." "You declared him dead," Jessica said, "because he chose a craft over a title." "We did," the Duke admitted, "and we were wrong. We spent 20 years being wrong, and now our son is truly gone. We can't undo that, but we can acknowledge you, our granddaughter." He pulled out documents. "These formalize your claim to the Ashford estates as Oliver's heir. You would be the Duchess of Ashford in your own right, with all the lands and titles that entails." Jessica looked at the papers, then at Robert. He wrote quickly, "Your choice. Whatever you decide, I support." She thought of her father, of his choice to leave all this behind, of the ring he'd hidden with the words, "Duty to craft, honor to family." "I'll accept the title," Jessica said slowly, "on one condition. The Ashford estates will be used to establish trade schools and apprenticeships, places where children of any background can learn crafts, arts, skills, where birth doesn't determine destiny." The Duke of Ashford smiled, and it transformed his stern face. Oliver would have loved that. "I know," Jessica said. "That's why I'm doing it." Papers were signed, witnesses gathered, and Jessica Davison became Jessica Davison, Duchess of Ashford, in her own right. But more importantly, she became the woman who honored her father's legacy by making his ideals real. Later, as the gala wound down, Robert and Jessica stood on the balcony overlooking the gardens. Snow was beginning to fall, soft and quiet. "I want to marry you," Jessica said suddenly. "Not because I need protection or security, because I choose to, because you saw me when I was invisible and valued me when I felt worthless, because your silence speaks louder than anyone's words." Robert's eyes shone. He pulled out his journal and wrote carefully, "I want to marry you because you're the strongest person I've ever met, because you turned suffering into compassion instead of cruelty, because when I look at you, I see the future I want to build." They kissed then, soft and tentative, a promise of something beginning. When they pulled apart, Jessica laughed. "We're going to be terrible at this, you know. Two broken people trying to build something whole." "Maybe," Robert wrote, "but broken things mended together are often stronger than they were before." My father used to say that about steel. Your father was a wise man. The inside, the party continued. Sarah and Arnold had been escorted from the property. The nobility of Montvale had witnessed the beginning of a new era. And somewhere in the heavens, Oliver Davison smiled, knowing his daughter had not just survived, but thrived. The fire that was meant to consume her had only served to forge her into something unbreakable. And the girl who once believed she was cursed learned that she was actually blessed, blessed with resilience, with courage, and with a love that asked for nothing but gave everything. Thank you for staying with us until the end of Jessica's incredible transformation. If this story moved you, please give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs a reminder that their current situation is not their final destination. Subscribe to join our community of story lovers. Or the fire that was meant to consume Jessica Davison only served to temper her into a woman of unbreakable spirit. She proved that while we cannot choose the hands that raise us, we can choose the life we build for ourselves. Lady Sarah Patel learned too late that the daughter she treated as ash was actually a diamond in the making. Jessica went on to revolutionize education in both the Montvale and Ashford duchies, creating schools where birth didn't determine destiny. She and Robert married in a quiet ceremony 6 months after the gala, and their partnership became legendary. Two people who understood that strength came in many forms, including silence. As for Sarah, she lived out her days in a modest cottage, supported by a small pension from Jessica's foundation. Not because Jessica owed her anything, but because Jessica refused to become the kind of person who returned cruelty for cruelty. The pension came with one condition. Sarah had to work at one of Jessica's trade schools, teaching girls basic skills. It was there, watching young women learn and grow, that Sarah finally understood what she had destroyed in her own daughter. The regret never left her eyes. Royal eventually left England entirely, seeking his fortune in America. Arnold died of a heart attack 2 years later, his ledgers revealing debts and schemes that would have landed him in prison if Jessica hadn't quietly paid them off to spare the family further scandal. But this isn't their story. It's Jessica's. The girl who survived when survival seemed impossible. The woman who learned that silence could be strength, that broken could be beautiful, and that the hottest fires produce the strongest steel. Thank you for watching this presentation. We hope you found both entertainment and a bit of wisdom in Jessica's journey. Stay tuned for our next video, where we explore a tale of a forgotten heir returning to claim what was lost in the shadows of the great forest. We look forward to seeing you there. Goodbye. Subscribe to see how this unfolds and comment where you're watching from. I will love to say hello to you, just to know how far our story is going.